Welcome to this Canadian Patriot Podcast, where I'm very happy to be joined by Nick Morianos, who is a managing partner at Gold Silver Bull in Alberta. Somebody I've found their thoughts to be nuanced in a way, in the best way possible, because I find a lot of people, especially in our current crisis-ridden day and age, want to jump and leap to crystallized, full polarized answers on a variety of topics that they don't know anything about. They didn't take the time to properly appreciate the topography, the terrain that they're operating in, and yet they want to have strong opinions anyway. And that's a great way to get ourselves and our loved ones killed. Nicholas, in chatting with you a couple of times now, I've noticed that you don't do that. You tend to look for you take in information as much as possible before you cast a judgment, and you have a much more balanced way of approaching the very reality that we are moving through, which is an objective, systemic economic crisis. It's not just Alberta. It's not just Canada. It's a transatlantic, what we could even say global systemic crisis that we're moving through, of which we are a part of. We have discussions as a consequence of that in a variety of ways, like what's heating up all across Alberta, independence being the big fight right now that people are debating, whether with Carney coming in and with a lot of very sick ideas in Ottawa. And is this something that Albertans feel that they have a future with if they stay to it, or what kind of change can they possibly get in a way that's going to be maximum workable and beneficial? And it's ugly. I mean, the schism now between those who want to stay with one Canada under Carney versus those who want to break away and have the separatist movement in Alberta, it's getting ugly, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. These discussions sort of probably have been going on and have been happening for a long time. But in talking to you, I've noticed that you haven't taken a radical position in any regard, and so we're having this conversation today because you are a strategic thinker. And when I would just ask you this right off the bat, Alberta, well, let's start it that way. Let's start it that way. Should Alberta go for independence at this moment?
I mean, yes, it likely should. Um, it's so it's a complicated question, and it's a simple question at the same time. Like we were just talking before you hit record. We can go into the economics of it, and those are pretty clear. I think we don't know what the actual numbers are because, like everything, it just seems to be clear as mud. Numbers are numbers. The way that they're interpreted can create, wiggle room and subjectivity, et cetera. But we're not even really being presented with clear numbers. And I think, there's some groups that are trying, but I just don't know. I don't know how much they have access to. I think this is best. The best analogous situation would be the whole notion of like the Alberta pension plan should be black and white, but it's not for some reason. And obviously there's vested interests, et cetera, et cetera. Coming back to your question, yes, I believe that. I mean, I believe that as a private citizen, with the company and, the blessings that we've had from it at Silver Gold Bull, I can't politicize the company nor would we, but as a private citizen that lives in Calgary, born here, raised in Ontario, but have lived here continuously for 15, going on 16 years. Yeah, 100%. It feels right, but it's going to come at, I would suspect, quite a bit of, for many of us, maybe not so much for me, but some personal costs, relationships. It's going to come with a lot of problems, and the process of getting there, when you unpack it, is pretty daunting. If we're being practical and being honest, and we're not just going to sugarcoat everything and puppy dogs and ice cream. Yeah, I think it's worth it, but it's going to be not a straight shot. It's going to be a long and circuitous path. And I think that one of the worst parts about it is we haven't really even seen the government apparatus, the mainstream legacy media's apparatus really whip up into a fervor and train its barrels on the movement and on Alberta.
Mm-hmm. When I go to Alberta, and I've been going pretty frequently to speak to various freedom groups now for the last couple of months, and it's enlivening. because it's the only place in Canada where I'm seeing like a sign of patriotism in life that I can really I get a lot of edification engaging with moral citizens taking responsibility. So that's great. But at the same time, I've noticed that there is a lot of um romanticization, this idea that, the path is clear, it must be done in this specific way, get the the referendum going, get it now, and just let's control our resources, control our destiny, and let's make it happen. Now, I like hearing optimism, and that's all great, but at the same time I find that there's a lack of sensitivity of the obstacles, practical obstacles, in front of said movement. And in your mind, what are some of those obstacles that are real and that are not being given enough attention at this moment?
Well, where do you start?
Mm,
Honestly, the fact of the matter is, this movement has been something that's been on like the slowest boil ever for a very, very long time. There was this Wexit, point in time, that whipped up into a fervor, but it really kind of went away with a bit of a whimper. Now, again, that's not meant with any sort of disparagement to the people that started it, but it I just don't think your average person out there, myself included, as totally the most average person, um, has paid a tremendous amount of attention. Like I've, in our role at work, my partners and I have hopefully, left a lasting impact on a lot of young individuals. We've mentored a lot of them, and I know that a lot of them came in with, you talk about romanticism, full of piss and vinegar about we should do this and the province should do that, and you know, you look at them and you think, well, have you thought this through practically? Like, is this really something that you think could work? And as you work through it, it just didn't make sense, landlocked, et cetera, et cetera. But as we move, we become full circle. I think we are now at a moment where, we're entering a territory that's akin, not exactly the same, but akin to, and potentially worse, to the early 80s. And, some of the actions of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, with regards to energy. So, the energy is there, the optimism is there, but if we're talking about one of sort of the problems that are going to befall this, I think the first place we have to start, and with full respect for the groups and everything that are spearheading this, and speaking as somebody who lives in Calgary but was raised in rural Ontario in a small town and is very much, at my heart, rural. This is a movement that started in rural Alberta. It is, for all intents and purposes. That's going to be a hurdle. This movement was started there. This movement was fostered there. This movement has been, really, if you look at it objectively, it caters to the individuals that are there. They're lovely, they're everything, but do those individuals, and does that movement, in the way that it's been crafted, does that jive with an urban population? And if you look at the population dynamics generally of Alberta, you've got around 4.5 million people. I will put full disclosure with everything. I'm not looking at, specific numbers, and I'm not holding them out to be all completely accurate, but we're talking ballparks and generalities. About 4.5 million people in Alberta, and the combined populations of Edmonton and Calgary about 3 million. This is a battle, right? And objectively, that we have seen over the past number of years that Alberta has been at the forefront of internal migration within Canada. Alberta's population has far exceeded its births over mortality. So we're seeing a lot of people come here. They're not all necessarily, it's certainly part of it is this, massive influx of immigration, but a lot of it is internal migration. So you're getting people that are likely coming to the cities, other big cities, because housing was cheaper here, standard of living is quite high, mountains, young demographic, etc. So you need a message, and you need an overall program that is catered towards both the rural populations, although really you don't even need to. I mean, you just say separation, and I think it's going to be a go there. But
You've sold, it's an easy sell. Yeah.
it's an easy sell. You need something that's going to get your, for the people that are across Canada, the equivalent of, the 905 soccer moms in the GTA or the 416 soccer moms. But it's no different here. And I've used this as an analogy. I've lived in neighborhoods in central Calgary where, you're talking about people that are earning a solid, like household income is in the solid six figures. These are people that are in and around oil and gas. They're not the CEOs necessarily, but they're geologists, they're this, that, what have you. Federally, okay, it's pretty blue, but provincially, there's a lot of orange. There's a lot of NDP signs that go up. So I can't speak to whether that is a social issue or what have you. Like if it's just peer pressure, I don't know. I mean, there certainly were a lot more liberal signs up in central Calgary this past election than I would have expected, all things considered. But I think that whole election was crazy. But these are people, if you're voting NDP, you're voting against your own best interests if you're in oil and gas. Yeah. So these are the houses that you need to convince. So, I guess a long-winded way of saying, I think one of the big stumbling blocks right out of the gate is the fact that this movement really, I don't think, has figured out how to deal with the 800-pound gorillas in the room, which is Calgary and Edmonton.
Yeah. I'm glad you said it that way because it is an observation I've made too in the various groups that I've spoken to. And at this point, there's been a good number. So I feel like I have a pretty wide sense of experience now of the various groups that are the most active within the independence movement, the Alberta Prosperity Project, and many others, some closer and some less affiliated with Daniel Smith's organization. And they're really good people. But at the same measure, you can't help but avoid the fact that it's mostly white-haired or at least, 60 to 80-year-old spectrum white males who are the primary leaders, speakers, and activists within the movement, and their wives. A lot of great women too, but the younger demographics, not really very much represented. Not a lot of younger girls, especially not a lot of older girls who are taking a front, who are taking a front leadership position, and other ethnicities. I don't really see too much. There's a little bit, but there's really not much, and not when you walk down the downtown streets of Calgary or Edmonton, and you see such a wide spectrum of people of various ages, and then you go to these meetings, and yeah, there is a disconnect. So that is serious. So if you were, let's say, I mean, I know you're a citizen, you're a private citizen, you're a patriot, trying to make sense of things and do the best you can. But if you were in a position of advising policy amongst the patriot movements right now who want the outcome oriented towards independence, what type of advice would you give them to change or to improve their strategy for the urban networks who might be left out, who might be on the fence, who might be completely on another planet, voting orange left and right? What sort of strategy should they have if they were a bit wiser and tactful for the urban networks?
Yeah, I'll stop short of saying like they're wiser because I don't know. Like
Okay.
they could win like with their strategy. But if someone came up to me and asked me what they should do, I'd say the first thing that you should do is take a deep breath. This is not a sprint. I don't understand why it is that that let's be honest. I mean, it's really APP, I think, at this point, the Alberta Prosperity Project. They were very shrewd in putting out a request for email addresses and signups, et cetera, immediately, pretty much as the election was happening. They went live. And there are a number of other relatively prominent groups within the province that had pretty large email lists. I don't know a whole lot about that political process, but it seems like emails are gold for them, no pun intended. But they took the initiative, and first mover advantage. They are in the pole position to lead the charge. So fair play to them. But so if I was speaking to them, I'd say honestly, and I mean, I'd say it's not a sprint. This is something where, Carney and the Liberals have only just gotten back into the legislature. They've really barely touched on anything from a policy perspective. The thing that's been most prominent, I believe, is the fact that they haven't canceled pending legislation that is hugely harmful to Alberta, much less enacted anything else. So whether that's, ban on internal combustion, ban on new pipelines, ban on oil off the West Coast, et cetera. So you can already put, if you want to call them wins in the check, sort of in the win column, you've got some there. But you can't rush this, because this is really, it's going to morph into something more of like a marketing campaign than anything else. Like, you don't want it to be something that looks like a grift, but it really has to be something that's really well produced. So the first thing that I do is I would take a deep breath and not rush anything. The second thing that I would do is I would look to put, different voices, and I'd really think long and hard about the face of it. The face could remain the same, but, this sort of image that's been etched into my brain of, four guys at the front of a room, not all on the same page, talking about how they want to lead the charge for Alberta separation, is one that isn't going to resonate. It just isn't, like, I'm the furthest thing from woke or, whatever, but you do need the voice of women on there. You need people that, because you're talking, and this is just practically speaking, you're talking about maybe one of the most fundamentally major moments in the life of a resident that just happens to be here. Like, there may not be, in a person that lives 70, 80, 90 years, there may not be many moments that register with them more sort of seminally than this. The fact that a province within the country of Canada had a movement where they got out. So how comfortable are women, especially educated, liberal, white women in downtown Calgary or Edmonton, but also ethnic communities, et cetera? How comfortable are they with, these big, predominantly white personalities that, whether they are rural or not, look rural, saying, we've got this, we know what's best for you. Like, you know what I mean? Again, just practically speaking, I think that's what I would do, is I would think long and hard about, I think the age thing is big, but I do believe that younger generations are smarter. They're so tuned in, they're so dialed in to information. You just have to present it to them in a way that makes sense. We talked about this when we crossed paths at the Bitcoin rodeo, and I certainly did with Cynthia, in that we've been, like, our brains have been changed. We process information now, not in long form as much, but in short form. So find a way, craft a marketing campaign that really focuses on getting, for certain demographics, getting them information in the way that they want to consume it. Fact-based. Give them citations. Reference everything that you give them, but give them the numbers that make the difference for them, that will tell them, hey, I might be able to own a house sooner, or I may be able to retire sooner, or I was scared about getting married, but I might be able to afford getting married, and I might be able to have a kid, where in a lot of cases, people don't even know where to start, because any one of those things they feel like will cause them huge financial crisis. So, and then for the people in there that aren't, like, the women, the ethnic groups, speak to them in their own way. You can't translate everything. You can't, do everything for everybody, but you can be strategic about it. This process that predominantly the APP is going through right now is, to my knowledge, they're doing a series of town halls. They're like a 2.5, 3 hour blunderbuss of information. And I just don't think it has to be that way. And really, I mean, they would tell you themselves, I think overwhelmingly it has been, again, back to this issue of rural, they've been focused on rural communities. You're singing to the choir and preaching to the converted there. Like, you need to do groundwork in the cities with people that the people in the cities feel like resonates with them. The only other thing I would add is, You need to package all of this in a way where it's ready, aim, fire, not ready, fire, aim. The reason I say that is one of the most critical components of this, again, just thinking of it practically and having had lots of conversations with people that we both know, is you need the business community to come on side. Now, Silver Gold Bull might not be able to ever put it out to their, customer base and say, well, what do you think of this? Or we should do that. Like that's not how that works. But think about it from the perspective of, you're in downtown Calgary or downtown Edmonton. You're a reasonably prominent CEO of a company that employs 500, 1,000, 1,500 people. You stand a lot to lose from sticking your head up. Let's think of it from the perspective of an individual who's a CEO of a company that has governmental affiliations. You get grants from the government. You get whatever it might be. You're one of your bigger customers is the government. I mean, you might feel very passionately about this project, but you're going to be damn sure to not stick your head up and say anything and risk anything unless you know that you're in good hands. And I think right now, the individuals that are running this they appear to be, to the extent that I know them, they appear to be honorable individuals, ethical individuals. Their heart might be in the right place, but I don't believe that what they're presenting is something that everybody can say, I feel comfortable with that. Not from the perspective of, the grift or anything like that, but from the perspective of this is something that's going to sell. Like it's kind of like who's going to stick their head up first? Who's the first one that's going to pop up and say, I'm all in. Let's do this. And we're not talking about the influencers that are out there. We're talking about the individuals who people are going to say, holy shit, I can't believe that woman or that man is into this. I need to give this some second thought. Do you know what I mean? Like that's where they need to have something that's really polished and really looks credible so that those individuals who do have a lot of sway in and amongst the population can get behind it and they're willing to take a risk.
Yeah. Oh, that's very well said. And I mean, that's one of the positive aspects, I guess, of the younger generation is that there is a very serious mistrust of authority, the likes of which we've never seen before. And that's good. That's good in a way. There's
start.
less. Hmm?
It's a good start.
It's a good start. I mean, there's bad sides too. The annihilation of our concentration span due to social media and short-term thinking. That's a problem. That's a problem.
It's huge.
But there's definitely a lot to work with there. And with that, like you said, if the message can be packed in a manner which provides is both appealing to listen to and at the same time deals with fundamental, I think, the inhibitor that a lot of people face, which is pessimism. They're for good reason in many ways, cynical about the future. Most young people don't think their lives are going to be better than their parents. That's a fact across the board. They don't think that they're going to own a house. And for the most part, they're right. If things don't change systemically, that's correct. And yeah, you're right. They don't want to have a family. They don't want to have children in general, the younger generations I'm speaking to right now, because they're fundamentally cynical about what it means to be human, what it means to be what the economy offers our future, what the prospects are. So if you can speak to that in a very simple way, I think that's what's lacking in a lot of the political discourse. You get the hope and change stuff, very flaky, flowery language that doesn't really carry a punch because there's no follow through. There's no like concretely, how are you going to do it? You want hope and change. You want to, okay, but how are you going to fulfill that promise? That causes people to have even less faith in optimism in general. They smell it and they're like, oh, I smell bullshit coming. I'm going to go the other way. But if you could actually present a concrete plan, a vision that actually gives people a sense of how can you, as a young person, concretely own a home within a very short time? How can you have a future that could be bright if things are changed? So in that sense, for the vision aspect, which again, I don't see enough of, I don't see enough, they say without a vision, the people perish. What sort in it, I guess, because a lot of people are going to be watching this who are not necessarily in Alberta, and for people in Alberta, they might not even have a clear idea. What do you think would be the best that a strong independence movement could offer as arguments to persuade younger people that it would be possible to have a future in the way that we're talking? What sort of talents could Alberta bring to bear, resource and otherwise, that are not being utilized or being prevented from being utilized under the current configuration as it stands?
I think when you're talking to people about anything to do with their future, for better or for worse, it always comes down to money. So give people, let's use this as an analogy. I touched on the Alberta pension plan, this idea which kind of won't go away, but hasn't really come to fruition. Now, I'm sure that there's going to be people that say, Nick, you're not thinking about this quite as fully as necessary. But the way that I see it is you have a very limited number of outcomes. Okay, if Alberta were to leave the rest of the Canada pension plan, notwithstanding what they're going to do in the future with investment or what have you, the idea is, would an individual that's retiring have more money, the same money, or less money? And would that individual retire sooner, at the same age, or later in life? How the hell is it this hard to get these answers? But this has been going on now for the better part of 2 years. So I think this is, when you look forward and you look to what we're talking about now with secession, I think it's very similar. You're thinking about it from the perspective of, okay, hey, you individual that makes $55,000 a year, this is what you currently pay in tax. This is what you currently pay in income tax. This is what you currently pay in all of the other, hidden taxes that are out there, carbon tax, whatever, GST, et cetera. Now, I'd stop short of saying that you're going to come up with policy ideas. I told you this. I heard there were they were floating the idea of we can do this and we can do that. And I'm thinking, well, but you're not the government. So what's the point? But you could say, well, in a world where the government elected to do, you could run campaigns. In a world where the government elected to work just on value-added tax, and they raised the value-added tax to 8%, but then they said no income tax, or they lowered income tax to a flat rate of whatever it might be, something quite low. You can give people numbers. You could have calculators that basically say to people, plug your income in here, and this will tell you what your net is currently, and in a system where, we're taxed at an exceedingly low level, one of the lowest levels in North America, or one of the lowest levels in the Western world. Because that's presumably what we would be looking at an incredible amount of money that wouldn't be leaving the province. Like they throw these numbers around. Like I've seen that Alberta sends 20 billion more in equalization than it gets back from the federal government. And I believe I read somewhere that in the last 20 years, the average has been $23 billion on average that we send just in equalization out that we don't get back, which, over 20 years, you're talking about $460 billion. There's a lot of money there. So that's how I would speak to, groups that feel right now really stressed. Look, we employ a number of young individuals. They're all wonderful, early 20s, mid 20s, even up to say the group that's in that early 30s. There's lots of kids that have been born, while the individuals, both men and women, were here. Everything has happened here, but you can feel the stress, right? Like you just see the individuals that are moving apartments every year. They don't even have the ability to stay in one place because rents get changed and this and that. So I think you speak to how much people are going to be able to take home and how this might present economic opportunities. And I think another thing that never gets talked about is I don't see anybody out there that's talking about slashing and burning in some sort of, austerity measures manner, social programs. So I don't think that's going to happen. If anything, you're talking about programs that theoretically get a new lease on life, especially where they're not administered in Ottawa. Like we just look at the numbers of money that gets sent to Ottawa and how much of it is just pissed away into administration. Like there are very few instances in life where you get, in theory, a clean break. So there are some, like healthcare is provincial, education is provincial. So those theoretically, nothing really is going to change there too much. But anything that touches the federal government, you have an opportunity to say, first of all, we're not employing these individuals in Ontario or Quebec or wherever they are. These are going to be Alberta employees with a bureaucracy that we set up, which will eventually bloat itself because that's life. But at least initially, it will start at a better level. We should get more for our money, have more money left over, and give people a better economic future. Again, but it's on the individuals that are trying to spearhead this to give us the numbers and then present it in such a way where, we can make that decision for ourselves. Like, it's easy for me, I should say, it's easy for me to say, oh, my life would be better because I pay too much in taxes. Like, you're not going to have a problem convincing, you're not going to have a problem convincing me that we need to do this. You have a problem convincing people who maybe are marginalized right now, or, like, that's part of the problem. That's part of the nefarious nature of a system of government that we have, where it's all predicated on easy money and handouts. It's not that people don't want better. It's that people become addicted to or hooked on the subsidies that come with easy money and really socialist-oriented systems. It's like, yeah, they need those handouts because you've washed away all of their economic ability. You've taken away their opportunity for jobs because you've handcuffed the economy. You've, eroded away the value of any savings that they may have had. And then life takes care of the rest. Like, it's death by a thousand cuts. When we were growing up, we didn't have 1995 for Netflix. We didn't have, cell phone plans that were $75, $100 a month. We didn't have, you open up your phone and you're on Instagram and everybody's selling you something for $7.99 a month that makes you feel like your life's going to be better. An app that you plug your data into and it tells you if you walk this far, you'll lose this much weight. Like, it's insane, but that's life right now, right? So,
well, yeah, it seems like we're really in such a civilizational crisis in some ways that if we miss these opportunities now, I'm afraid that it'll be feasibly many generations before we have a chance to recover. And I mean, you just hear the discussions of some of these toxic ideas being floated around, and not even floated around, like in motion, like universal basic income, that it seems that they want to start pushing down people's throats in the context of a solution to a systemic economic crisis, a calamity, which is going to destroy a lot of lives if that's not dealt with. Then the solutions that we are seeing being promulgated, like, again, UBI, paying people to, they've already got them started, I guess, conditioned a little bit through the COVID response and getting cash just to survive because your job's shut down. But now on top of that, having no jobs per se that are going to employ people, or so they say at least. But they'll pay, and then after you get your UBI, there's unlimited legalized drugs to keep you stimulated and in an escapist mentality. So you're not in despair because you got drugs, you got video games, you got some virtual reality, and then you have MAID for when that gets boring and you're tired of the nihilism of just like being a leaf. When you're tired of being a useless eater, you could just easily get access to some MAID and maybe become Soylent Green for somebody's dinner the next day or something, right? Like these are the kinds of sick dystopic ideas that used to be the stuff of Hollywood movies in the 70s and 80s. And all of a sudden it's like, it's becoming less reality TV. And this is like reality. It's hard to imagine. So it's like, we have this window now to make some serious changes before we get addicted to this new type of suicide path. So it's like, then the question is, Alberta seems like a place where, again, there's the biggest yearning for life that I noticed culturally. I detect it more viscerally in Alberta than anywhere else. But then there's like amongst people who are in our cause, who are sort of walking to the same frequency, there's some dispute. You got Ben Trudeau, a good friend of mine and somebody as well, who's of the view that, Alberta should not necessarily go for independence, but rather force a New Deal onto Ottawa, utilizing the powers of the BNA Act and the Westminster system. That does give, I mean, frankly, it's true. If wielded correctly, it's true that type of authority could force a complete renegotiation of all of the unjust, unfair agreements that currently Alberta as a province has with Ottawa. It's true.
Mhm.
Other people like Jeff Rath and we're talking about Michael Wagner are like, no, just go straight for independence. Um, I'm sort of pulled in both. I don't really. I see both may or may not work depending on other conditions. I think you're kind of the
But
same
it
way.
doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter
What do
because
you?
it's the same. You're going to the same place. Like,
Mm,
again, stopping short of definitives, but the way that this is, the way that I understand this, I think the way that most people understand, um, a constitutional process for potentially seceding, it's like it's not something that comes up every day. So, we're not
yeah.
all scholars in it, but um, we talked briefly about this earlier. You need two things. You need a constitutionally clear question, and you need this murky, as yet, probably, well, definitely on purpose, undefined clear majority. But leaving aside the argument that and the fight that will happen with this ambiguous clear majority, which some people feel is 50+1 and other people think could be upwards of 60%, the clear question is going to be a question that's going to have to involve, when you read it to 10 people, they're going to all presumably have to understand that this means that, if you vote in the affirmative, that Alberta is going to leave Canada. But the reason that I say that we're all going to the same place is my understanding, and I believe as it was explained by was it Michael Wagner? That's his name. Yeah, by Michael, is that there is there's a mandated negotiation that will have to happen if and when a province votes to secede. So in theory, you're this negotiation is going to be one where both parties are coming to the table and bringing their best offer. It would behoove, I would think, the federal government to want Alberta to stay. First of all, it would cause an awful problem in the middle of the country with this discontinuation, vis-a-vis the landmass. Second, it's only going to spur more problems, within the greater Western, probably within Western Canada for sure. I think Saskatchewan would have to be looking at it and saying we're not far behind, if not joining Alberta for the ride. And, from there, Quebec, who knows? So, and then notwithstanding the fact that obviously a huge percentage of the wealth of the country resides, under my feet here, where I am in Alberta, with respect to oil and gas revenues that are as yet untapped. So I think they're going to have to come with their best offer. Presumably the premier at that point, who will have taken up the charge, will negotiate for Alberta's side. And you never know. You might get a situation where you get a Quebec style deal where Alberta gains a ton of autonomy, a ton of sovereignty within Canada. I just don't know how you sell that. Like, I know that I believe in the initial incarnation of the Alberta Prosperity Project. I believe that Mitch Sylvester and the people that started it, I think that's what they were after, is they were after sovereignty within Canada. And again, it's a noble idea. It's just, I don't know how you actually get people jazzed up for it,
Mm.
because you're going to have a lot of people that are just going to be apathetic. Like, it's a catch-22 either way. You could have people where you say we want to secede and they're like, that's too much. You tell people that you want to have sovereignty within Canada and it's not enough to actually to have a referendum on. So I think you probably, on balance, you're probably going for secession, and you're settling for, because you're happy and because it meaningfully changes your life to get sovereignty within Canada. And I don't think it's the most original idea in the world, but again, you're going to have people that kind of plug their nose and come along for the ride. And, if the federal government deals with Alberta in the way that it has in the past dealt with Alberta, which is, the mushroom treatment, which is, put them in the dark and feed them shit. Well, you're going to get a lot of people whose resolve is now steadied. You're going to get people that panic and like, oh my God, I made a mistake. What's going to happen? But their vote's already counted. It's going to be a lot of the other people, though, honestly, that are going to say, no, this was the right call. And you're going to have, naturally, you're going to have people in the household where let's say one of the two partners was nervous about it, that's going to turn to the other one and say, I told you, like, we need to do this. And they're going to say, you're right. So again, we don't know which way it will go, but I think, and I'm not a marketing person at all, but I think when you're presenting this to people, you're presenting it in a way where you're saying Alberta needs a new deal, but the question very much revolves around leaving so that you can jump the hurdle constitutionally, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you, and I think it's true. Like, there's so many people who are on the fence, and it's such a big thing to ask people to do something like vote for independence. And we don't have to talk about all the things like in the imaginary situation where we actually successfully do it and the referendum passes. There's a lot of other hurdles to then encounter. That's just like one battle within a much
Oh, Matt,
broader
it's like
process, right? So
it's daunting. Like honestly,
yeah,
I thought about it for 5 minutes, and I just touched on the fact that education and healthcare, those are provincially funded things anyways. You might say, well, there's a lot of money that comes in terms of grants or with strings attached from the federal government. So there is money that comes from the feds that goes towards building this or building that or what have you, new hospitals where they help. But you're also saying, a province like Alberta, which is the most have of all have provinces, will have more than enough money to cover that and then some. So I don't think that that's a big issue. But just in general, like you have to renegotiate everything,
yeah,
military, access to the coast, but federal, like, I mean, the railway companies are like the mafia, like, just everything, telecoms. There's no Telus, Rogers, Bell in the United States or anything. So what happens with those? Again, they might seem trivial, and of course they're not insurmountable, but with the way that our lives are built and how stressed out everybody is with all the info that we're constantly bombarded with, it would be really easy if you're spearheading something like this and you haven't even given some thought to be able to give people enough info but not too much so as to bring them to ease but not necessarily like send them off like the deep end.
yeah,
Then you're doing yourself and the movement a disservice. That's just an opinion, of course, but like this is going to seem daunting, and there's certainly, you can't answer every question in an FAQ, and I don't know if that's the best place to do it, but I think there are ways in which even the alternative media here, because legacy media won't do shit. So there's different ways in which you can get information out, infographics, etc. Again, just kind of bring the noise down and just have it be a really adult conversation.
yeah. That's great, Nick. And you're somebody. I guess we'll round it out this way, because I mean, you're managing partner at Silver Bull. You're partners with Bow Valley, the excellent credit union, doing something very unique and original that I don't see anywhere else in Canada.
No,
Um,
Brett and his team they definitely think outside the box.
yeah. So as such, like, maybe whether you want to cater this to the discussion of what we're talking about regarding a sane economic plan for Alberta, or if you want to talk about the concepts of what a sane economy should be if we weather this coming storm or this current storm and come out of it with lessons learned and a more sane approach to thinking about economics, based on your experience at the forefront of some cutting edge stuff on e-commerce, on gold and silver, precious metals, and working with credit unions. What would you say are the core lessons you would want to have communicated to people who would need to know? Like, they know what a dysfunctional economic system looks like, but they don't necessarily yet know what a functional economic system is supposed to look like that doesn't periodically blow up in our face, under a speculative bubble of casino economics. So I don't know, what words of wisdom could you maybe provide from your experience on that front?
I think number one, there could be a lot of volumes written on the perils of cheap money. Like, I think it seems so appealing. Obviously, you can make a lot of money if you're smart about it in an economic system that's predicated on cheap money. If you're ahead of it, you buy anything, it seems to go up in value. So trying to explain to people that having real interest rates is in their best interests especially if they're already tied into mortgages, et cetera, and high cost of housing, they might think you've lost the plot. But it's just history tells us over and over again, a real economy means real interest rates, and it means not futzing with monetary policy. In terms of the economy, I mean, I'm not an economist, but let people work. Anecdotally, this doesn't. It's not a catch. Like, this isn't necessarily the some sort of panacea or whatever. Just letting people work, but anecdotally, I remember being in Calgary in 2012 and 2013. I tell this story like it's like anybody that's worked here or works here hears it too many times. But my wife and I are at the Stampede. We don't have kids at the time. Stampede, ironically, is happening right now, and they put people on the jumbotron and they're walking around the grounds like, oh, what do you do for a living? I'm an oil and gas. What do you do for a living? I'm a lawyer. What do you do for a living? I'm whatever. I don't know. I'm a paver. Great. Come to this one person, and this is in a live crowd, like 30,000 people, or this is being broadcast. What do you do for a living? I'm unemployed. And everyone, oh. And it was the weirdest thing. It's like, and the guy, the interviewer turns to the person and says, you're the one person in the province. And I mean, that's not perfect. And it's obviously, I'm glossing over a lot of real things, but simultaneously with that, we had homeless people. We didn't have the prevalence of homeless that we do now. We didn't have the drug epidemic that we have now. And Calgary's much better to my eyes than any of the other cities in the country rather that I frequent. We didn't have the petty crime that exists. You fast forward 2.5 years, middle of 2014, 2015, oil capitulates, everything goes off a cliff. The Trudeau government comes in. They start signaling all kinds of problems. We then subsequently get an NDP government that comes into power here that didn't run on this, but they put a carbon tax in place. And what we were left with was skyrocketing unemployment, obviously divorce and just marital strife at crazy levels. You had overtly some of the highest bankruptcy rates in the country. Now, that might be partly because people here have a certain proclivity to maybe spending money too much because we've consistently had high incomes, et cetera. But nevertheless, you had all of these economic factors, which then you could say, well, I think it's commonsensical, or at least reasonable to say that they spiraled into homelessness, drugs, alcohol abuse. And then within a couple of years, you've got placards in the backyards of downtown Calgary, neighborhoods saying, lock your garage, make sure your garage is closed, et cetera, because people are going through cars that are unlocked and and opening garages and stealing bikes and all kinds of stuff. Now, to the listener, that might seem like, okay, whatever. But I think that speaks volumes. If you don't let people work, they don't have hope. If that's preachy, I don't know what to tell you, but like that just seems pretty logical to me. Life is already stressful enough. If you live in a home and you have a partner and you have kids, you've got all kinds of social issues that are going on. You've got all kinds of stresses from work and whatever, all the nonsense that encompasses, a full life. You take people's economic abilities away from them. You take their job away from them, and then just look at everything. Like, what is the hallmark of, you could say liberal, but we don't know what a conservative government would look like. But governments generally seem to overregulate everything. They seem to want to control everything. They end up squeezing the life out of it, and then they subsidize it where necessary to bring it back to life. But that's not a way to bring anything back to life. And once the damage is done, like, I couldn't tell you, because I have no background in mental health or healthcare in general, how you take somebody that is destitute and homeless or drug addled or whatever and get them off the street and get them cleaned up. I don't know that process, but I could probably tell you with some reasonable certainty that if you let people work and have an economic future and live a life of hope, that they wouldn't get to that process. So that would be my thing, is if you ask me how to make a better life and a better economy, it would be let people work. But again, we're inundated with, it's, climate change, it's, global warming, it's DEI, it's this, it's that. It's like all we do is fight. And then while we're all distracted fighting about all kinds of things, they're grifting the hell out of life in the background, you know, contracts to friends, this and that, and just centralizing control of all of our lives. We didn't even touch on, and I don't have a huge opinion on it other than it's horrible, but just the notion of central bank digital currencies. Like, why in the hell would you ever vote to give more control over your life to the government, you know, especially your bank account and things like that? Like, what's wrong with what we have? So I think, yeah, let people work. Long-winded way of saying that's what I think would foster a better economy.
Yeah, that's a remarkably sane, common sense, yet still rare point of view. And since you said it, I'm going to ask you. I got you here. I'll just ask you this as the real last question now. Obviously, you know, I've got a Bitcoin wallet. I take payments that way, and it's you know it's got positive uses certainly. But I'm curious to get your, and I know you work with Bitcoin a lot and stuff too. I mean, I last met you at the Bitcoin rodeo.
Yep.
But I hear different views on whether or not Bitcoin can be weaponized or not. I know some people say it is synonymous with freedom and there's nothing to worry about if everybody just goes Bitcoin. I'm a little less inclined to that direction personally, but I know that other people say, oh no, it's just another trap to a digital, blockchain controlled surveillance cage that could also be controlled by technocrats to destroy our freedoms in a different direction than central bank digital currencies. And that's a little black pilled to me. But in your view, do you take one of the two extremes or somewhere in the middle or neither, none of?
I view it as a hard asset. I mean, it's kind of weird to say a hard asset when it's, ones and zeros, but realistically and theoretically, it's a hard asset. When I took the stage at the Bitcoin rodeo, I happened to be paired with two individuals that I think you would, on balance, say are, Bitcoin maximalists. They believe that Bitcoin can, in theory, solve every problem in the world. And on the one hand, I do think that's a lot nuts. I think that's probably pretty extreme. But on the other hand, I'm grateful to that community because I think, where I come from in the silver and gold world, a lot of the information space has been dominated by people that have been wearing tweed coats and have like patches on their elbows and moths that fly around them all the time. And it's a kind of tired message because it's very much end of the world, buy gold. Okay, I get it. That does, but can we park that discussion for a little bit? I believe that what's interesting about the Bitcoin community is that it really is a community based on optimism. It's a community based, like you're just as apt to see a Bitcoiner that says Bitcoin's going to go to $1 billion of Bitcoin as anything else. And I think that maybe that's not true, or I don't know, but I think that that's a hopeful message. So it's a good place to start. In terms of where it slots into the world, I just think it's another useful asset. Certainly, none of now I'm going to probably get this historically wrong, but I believe that the first white paper written on Bitcoin was written by like 3 NSA guys. Like, we still don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Okay, I don't know. But what I do think is you have, I believe it's like 21 million Bitcoin that are in existence. They aren't really making more of them. If you own them, and they go away all the time. I mean, there's how many people a year lose their Bitcoin? They just lose their keys, what have you. You think about it, and they're just not retrievable. There's still somebody rummaging through a dump somewhere because they lost 50, 100 Bitcoin, on a thumb drive. So point being, I think it makes sense to have, in the same way that I do believe that it makes sense to have some gold and some silver. And I believe it makes sense to have some real estate and, no debt. If you can get there. That's kind of where my mindset is. I feel like it's a really hopeful tool. I think it's an awesome tool for educating younger demographics on the perils of fiat currency. I just don't know that I don't think you should do, like, I wouldn't advocate for eating nothing but broccoli, or even, morning, noon, and night eating nothing but steak. Some people do. I'd probably say a little bit of balance in your life makes a lot of sense, and I don't think it's any different with something like hard assets.
All right, Nick Morianos, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom, and I look forward to our future
All
conversations.
right,
Take
you bet. Thanks.